Good morning, my friends. I am Pastor Ben Hayes from First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, coming to you from your far distant past. In other words, I'm recording this on Tuesday because on Thursday, I will be in Montgomery all day at a conference. Man, this has been a strange week. But I'm glad to be with you today. I'm glad you're with me today, and I'm praying for you as I spend this day in a conference. So think about me too, if you would. But right now, we're in Romans chapter 14. And we're going to be talking over the next few days about this law of liberty and what exactly that is. But listen to what Paul says. He says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Really? Paul's talking about the argument between vegetarians and carnivores. Interesting, isn't it? There's a principle here. And keep in mind what was going on in the church of that day. And it was happening all over the known world of that time in those churches. But here's what was happening. When you went to the marketplace to buy your food for the day, there would be all kinds of meat that was there. And you could buy that meat and take it home and cook it and have a dinner party. And everybody was able to eat until they were full. And what a great time of fellowship. The problem is that the majority of the meat that was sold in those markets had been offered to false gods, to idols, in their worship of the Greek pantheon of gods. And so here's what was happening. There were those who said, well, if you eat of that meat, you're participating in those worship rituals to those false gods because the meat had been offered and then the leftover was sent to the market to sell. Well, here's the thing. Most of the Christians, many of the Christians anyway, I'll say it that way, many of the Christians in the early church had come out of that pagan background. They had been worshiping these false gods all of their lives, sitting down to those cultic feasts where they celebrated these pagan rituals and a lot of times sensual rituals that would be a part of their worship service. And so let's just imagine that you've got a young Christian, a new believer, who has been touched by the grace of God, who's just come out of one of these false religions, and they are on fire for the Lord. But you invite them over to dinner, and they see that meat there, and they say, ooh, that was offered to one of these Greek gods. And if I eat this, then I'm going back to those old worship rituals. And what does that say about this guy who's been a Christian for years and he's still worshiping in these pagan rituals? It must be okay to do both. And so he stumbles back into that lifelong tradition that he's had, and he tries to hold on to his old life and his new life, and because of that, he stumbles into sin. And that's the problem. So look at what Paul says. He says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. In other words, think about this. Those who are weaker than us, we have a responsibility to help them to make it through this Christian life, understanding the truth of the gospel. And so he says, one believes he may eat all things. That's the older Christian. But he who is weak eats only vegetables because he wants to avoid that. And he thinks that's the only way that he can do that. He doesn't want to be drawn back into that. Well, Paul doesn't say, hey, you're wrong to eat that meat. You're wrong to not eat that meat. He says, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat. And let not him who does not eat judge him who eats. In other words, let them do what they feel is right, what God has convicted them of doing or not convicted them of doing. Don't judge them because they do that. He says, just let them do those things. But don't judge each other because of what you do or you don't do. Now, understand what he's talking about here. And he tells us later, especially over in Corinth, he says, the meat offered to these idols, it means nothing because those idols aren't real. And he says it's okay. It's okay to eat that. But there are those who still are convicted in their conscience, so don't push them. Don't force them, because that's when we make mistakes. when we've pushed them into that and they don't realize the freedom that we have in Christ Jesus. That's the law of liberty. We are free to do these things. But Paul's going to tell us that we're free to do all these things, but not everything that we do is expedient for us or for other people. You remember that question that we heard back in the book of Genesis when God approached Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" And Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The answer to that question is yes, we are. We have responsibilities, and we need to make sure that we do everything that we can not to cause a weaker brother to stumble into sin. Think about that. We'll talk about the application of that tomorrow. Be blessed.